1.2D is our second to last section before we do section 1.2 college algebra, and it's taking what we just learned in the previous lesson with GCFs, factor by grouping, and taking it to the next level. Okay, so factor by grouping is when you have 4 terms. The question is, what do you do when you have 3 terms, a trinomial? Well, you start the same. You say, okay, first of all, is there a GCF I can pull out of all of it? If so, I'm going to do that right off the bat. But then there's one extra step that we're going to do. We're going to do this little thing called the AC method that turns our trinomial, 3 terms, into a polynomial with 4 terms, because you guys know how to factor 4 terms. We just did that, okay? So that's what the AC method does. It turns it into a 4-term polynomial. How you do it, and I'll read it here, but I think doing it makes more sense than reading it. So it says, first factor out a greatest common factor if there's something other than 1. So that's always like the number 1 rule in factoring. You know, the number 1 rule of Fight Club, you don't talk about Fight Club. The number 1 rule of factoring, you pull out that GCF, okay? Number 2, for what remains, what we're going to do is we're going to take the A, which is the coefficient of the x squared term, times the C, which is the constant in back, and multiply those. Once we get that product, we're going to figure out the 2 numbers that sum to B, okay? And again, it's more confusing reading it than just doing it. Once we come up with those 2 numbers that sum to the middle term but multiply to be the A times C, we're going to rewrite the middle term using those 2 terms, so we now have 4 terms and we can do it. Let's just do it. I think it makes a lot more sense to do it, okay? So the first thing I want you to notice is this is A, it's a 1. And I'm going to put the 1 there, okay? So if the coefficient in front of your x squared is not there, it's assumed to be 1, right? So we're going to do, it's called sometimes the rainbow method. We're going to do A times C. Well, what's 1 times 12, guys? 12. So we want to think of things that multiply to 12. That's the AC, but add to the middle term B, 8. Okay? So basically what we're going to do is you always look for factors of your AC, so factors of 12, that add up to your middle term B. All right? And this one's probably the easiest scenario because everything's positive. Our AC is positive, our B term is positive, we're only going to worry about positive factors. Some of you right off the bat know, you're like, I know where they are, 2 and 6, I'm done, right? But say you don't because it's a bigger number or it's just a number you're not comfortable with, just go through every factor of 12. For example, and I'm going to do it here and I'll do it a couple times, but I'm not going to do it for every one. Start with 1. 1 and 12, right? Do you guys agree that 1 and 12 multiply to be 12? But what do they add up to? 13. I don't like it. So I move on to the next factors of 12. What are the other factors of 12? 2 and 6. What does 2 and 6 add up to? 8. Isn't that what we wanted? Yes, that's my winning pair. If it was not adding up to 8, I would move on. What's the next factor of 12? 3 and 4. So I just divide 12 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I just keep going and getting all the pairs. And once I find the pair that adds to that middle term B, I know I've done it. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to do something that seems a little backwards. So instead of leaving it as 8x, we're actually going to write it as 2x plus 6x. All right? So we're going to write this as x squared plus 2x plus 6x plus 12. Have we changed that 8x? Have we changed the size of 8x at all? No. What's 2x plus 6x? 8x, right? So it's the same middle term, but what I've done is I've broken up in a way that now we have 4 terms, and we can do factor by grouping, which we just did in our last lesson. Okay? So let's look at the first 2 terms, x squared and 2x. What can we take out of those 2 terms? X, right? When I take out that x, what remains? Well, I had 2 x's, and I took 1 out, so what remains? An x. And then we're going to be, I have a 2x, I took the x out, what remains? A 2. Okay? And again, if you're not sure, just double check it, guys. X times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. I got that chunk okay. Now let's just look at the back half. What can you take out of 6x plus 12? 6, right? And my hint to you guys is remember you want x plus 2 to remain. So you're like, okay, what's in front of the x that I want to get rid of? There's a 6 in front. Can I pull a 6 out of the 12 as well? I sure can. So we're going to factor out a positive 6. But when we do that, what remains? Well, 6 divided by 6 is 6, right? Or 1, excuse me. But it leaves me with that x. And then what's 12 divided by 6? 2. And look what we have. We have what we want. Remember when we do the factor by grouping, we want that binomial to repeat. So we can take it out one more time, okay? So that first is an ugly term. This is an ugly term, but what do they both share? X plus 2. So let's factor that x plus 2 out in front. And when we factor that x plus 2 out from the first term, what remains? X. When we factor it out of the second term, what remains? A positive 6. And again, the AC method is the true definition of unfoiling, undistributing. Because if you want to check any of these, what you guys can do is you can distribute it, and you should get back to your original. X times x is x squared. X times 6 is 6x. 2 times x is 2x. But what's 6x plus 2x? 8x. And then 2 times 6 is 12. You guys just did it, okay? But like I said, that's the easiest scenario because everything was positive. It gets tricky with negatives, like all the rules of negatives. So let's look at this next one here. What is the first term? Still 1. So what is our AC? 1 times 6 is still a positive 6, right? So we want to think of factors of a positive 6, so they multiply to 6. But now what do you notice about our B? It adds up to a negative, okay? So this just is kind of like number sense, guys. What kind of numbers are we going to consider if they multiply to be positive, but when you add them, they're always negative? What two numbers multiply to be positive, but when you add them, they're negative? Two negatives, exactly right. So anytime you always have a positive AC, you should always consider the same sign. Either two positives or two negatives, depending on the sign of your B, okay? So this B was a positive 8, so we knew we were going to think of positive factors. This B was a negative 5, so we're only going to consider negative factors, all right? So I start with the normal, 6. I do 1 and 6, but I just told myself they both had to be negative, right? Do you guys agree that negative 1 times negative 6 makes a positive 6? Yes, but what does it add to? I don't like it, so I want to move on, right? So then you say 6 divided by 2. Well, what's 6 divided by 2? 2 and 3, but what do we know about both their signs? They're both negative. What's negative 2 times a negative 3? Positive 6, but what's negative 2 plus a negative 3? There's our winning pair. Okay? And that's the newest thing about this section. Because once we have that winning pair, we can rewrite our trinomial into 4 terms and just do what we did in the last section, all right? So everything stays the same except the middle term. So this is still going to be a y squared minus 2y minus 3y plus 6. Does it matter if I write the 2y and 3y first? No. As long as you have the right two terms, the negative 2y and the negative 3y, you can flip-flop it. So sometimes I dare you guys to do it. Like, okay, be a rebel. You put negative 3y and negative 2y and see what happens, right? It'll match, okay? We'll get the same answer. All right, let's look at these first two terms. What can we factor out of y squared and 2y? A y. And when we factor out that y, what remains? 1y and a negative 2. If you were doing it the other way, you'd have a y minus 3. That's fine, okay? Now we're going to look at this back half. Pay attention to signs. We want our y to be positive, but right now it's what kind? Negatives. So I'm going to factor out a negative something, right? What number am I going to factor out? Negative?
1. Wait. Negative 3.
Negative 3. Remember your hint is, I want a single y there, and who's in my way right now? The guy in front. So let's pull him out, okay? So let's factor out a negative 3. And when you factor out that negative 3, a negative 3 divided by a negative 3 gives you a positive y. But what's a positive 6 divided by a negative 3? Negative 2. That's what we wanted, right? So what's the common factor that both of those terms have? Y minus 2. Let's pull him out in front. So we're going to factor out that y minus 2, and we're going to pull him out in front. When we pull him from the first term, what remains? A y. When we pull him from the second term, I heard it, minus 3. So like I said, what I was taught was this whole, we'll just think of factors of 6 and try to play around with factors of 6. Try those two, okay, multiply, they don't work, try different two. Like I was always constantly erasing. So this is kind of, it's a lot more work than just maybe trying to figure it out mentally, but it's systematic, and that's what I liked. I like the systematic part. All right, let's at the next thing. These next two are a little different because our AC is now a negative AC, okay, and we're going to talk about what that means. So our A is still a 1, so our AC is a negative 6, so we want to multiply to negative 6, and we want to add to negative 5. So, what two numbers do we have to consider if they're going to multiply to be negative? Opposite signs, right? One's positive, one's negative, all right? So anytime your AC is positive, it's always going to be two of the same signs, either both positive or both negative, multiplied to be a positive. But if your AC is negative, we're going to think of one positive, one's negative, all right? My hint to you is which factor is negative. It's always, this guy always goes to the higher factor, okay? So when we do 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and all that stuff, since our B is negative, we're going to give the bigger factor the negative sign. If you're like, I don't know what you're talking about, think of all the options. Think of 1 and -6, and -6 and +1. It's up to you, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write 1 and 6, but I know one needs to be negative and one needs to be positive. The only way opposite signs add up to negative is if the bigger number is negative. What do 1 and -6 add up to? -5. There he is, right there. Say you didn't get that right off the bat, you might try 2 and -3, but that adds up to -1. All right, so does it matter what order I put these? No. Y squared plus 1y minus 6y minus 6. Yes, I just put a coefficient of 1 there. And again, I like it because it lets me know what remains when I factor out that common term. So once you get your winning pair, you just split your middle term up. You keep the front and the back number the absolute same. Because don't you agree that 1y minus 6y is minus 5y, right? So let's look at these two terms. What can we factor out of y squared and y? Just y. What do you have when you take away 1y from two of them? Just 1y. And then you took away a y, but he was there at one point, so we have to have a +1. Okay, we got to be mind readers. We got to be fortune tellers. I want a positive y plus 1 left. What do I need to factor out? Not just a 6, but a -6, right? So I want to factor out that -6 so it splits and changes all my signs to what I want. -6 divided by -6 is a positive 1. The y remains. -6 divided by -6 is a +1. And that's exactly what I want to happen. So what do both of those have in common? Y plus 1. Let's factor him out. And what will remain? Y minus 6. And again, if you're kind of iffy whether you did it correctly, FOIL that bad boy and you'll see that it adds up to that initial trinomial. All right, last one is just the last, I shouldn't say it's the last one, but it's the last of the scenario as far as signs go, where we have a negative AC, but now our B is a positive value, okay? So this is a 1, so our AC is a -24. So we're going to multiply to a -24, and we're going to add to a positive 10. So it's similar to the one we just did. In order to multiply to be negative, one is positive, one's negative. But since it adds up to a positive number, the bigger factor will always be positive, okay? So I'm just going to run through the motions. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, that kind of thing, okay? So we'll do 1 and 24, but in order for one to be positive and one to be negative and this to add up to a negative, the smaller factor is the negative, okay? -1 times 24 is a -24, but what's that add up to? A positive 23. I don't like it. So then I go to 24 divided by 2. What's 24 divided by 2? 2 and 12. But again, in order for it to add up to a positive number, my smaller factor of 2 needs to be the negative one. So -2 times 12 is a -24, but what's it add up to? 10.
I thought the higher one had negative.
Nope. Your higher one wears the sign of the B. Okay? So notice this one, our B was negative, so our higher one had to wear the sign. And on this one, our B is positive, so our higher one has to wear the sign. Okay? And like I said, if that gets tricky, just think of every combination. 1 and -24 and -1 and positive 24, and you can kind of see what starts happening. So the higher one will wear the sign of your B, because when you go to add him, he like takes over, right? So when you go to add two numbers, the negative takes over, and that's how you get your negative. When you go to add two numbers, that bigger one, the positive will take over. Okay, so we're going to write this as p squared minus 2p plus 12p minus 24. P squared minus 2p, I know there's not a whole lot of room, sorry. Riley's like me where we write a little bit bigger, so it's hard to squeeze it in there. P squared minus 2p plus 12p minus 24. Again, be a rebel and flip-flop your order. You'll see that you'll get the same thing. All right, what can we take out of the first two terms? A p. When I take that p out, p squared goes down to p, and negative 2p just goes to a negative 2. Is that all right? So looking at the back 2, what do you want to take out of the back 2 so that you have a p minus 2 left? 12, right? It's like usually that it's not always, but it's usually that coefficient in front. You're like, I want just a p. Let's get rid of that 12. So you're going to factor out a positive 12. But when you do that, what are you left with? P minus 2. Perfect. So what's our common factor now? P minus 2 that we can factor out in front. And when you do that, what are you left with? P plus 12. Is that okay? So in Math 116, if you were to take Math 116, the 4 that we just did is like an entire section. They teach you how to do the AC method with just coefficients of 1. I don't. I teach it all in one section because when you go down to a coefficient of 3, it's the same thing. Except for instead of 1 times 12, it's 3 times 12. So you just think of a bigger AC, okay? So when we go to do these bottom 2, our coefficient in front A is different, and that's okay. Where we have to kind of keep our mind straight is we're going to use 3 times negative 14, whatever that is, as our AC. But when we go to rewrite it, it still says 3x squared, and it still says a negative 14. Your front and last terms always stay the same. It's only the middle 2 terms that we split up, okay? So what is 3 times negative 14? Negative 42. So we're going to multiply to negative 42, and we're going to add to 19. Okay? So what I do is I think, okay, what kind of numbers do we multiply to be a negative? Opposite signs. And who's going to wear the negative? Well, since we're adding to a positive, the bigger number is going to be positive. So I do 1 and 42. But the bigger one has to be positive, so that's a negative 1. What's negative 1 plus 42 add up to?
41.
41. I'm pretty far away. So I'm going to move on. Then I do 2 into 42, you get 21. But the 2 needs to be negative. What's that up to?
19.
And I didn't mean it to be this way, but I feel like every problem we've done, guys, the second factor is the winner. You know what I mean? Like we don't have to go much farther. Sometimes you gotta go farther. That's okay. So that adds up to 19. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna leave 3x squared as is, and then we're gonna write it as minus 2x plus 21x minus 14. Okay? So notice nowhere in there do we have 42. The a times c, that 42, got us our 2 winning terms, but when we go to rewrite them, 42 is nowhere, okay? 3x squared stays 3x squared, and the 14 stays 14. All right, we're going to just do factor by grouping. You cannot take a coefficient out of 3 and 2, but you can take a factor of x out. What do you get when you take an x out? Well, and not only 1x, but the 3 as well, right? Because we didn't take them out. We're so used to pulling out a number, but this one we don't. So that's going to be 3x, and then minus what? 2. And then on the back half, again, kind of keep in mind, you want that x positive, and it is, but you want a 3 remaining. So what do you need to take out of 21 so that a 3 is remaining?
7.
A 7. You got it. Okay. So again, kind of, and you don't have to. You can think of just GCFs if you want. What's the biggest GCF between 21 and 14? 7. Okay. So we're going to take out a 7. When you do that, what's 21 divided by 7? 3. The x remains. What's negative 14 divided by 7? Negative 2. And that's what we wanted to happen. We wanted that 3x minus 2 to match. So 3x minus 2 will come out in front, and then x plus 7 goes behind it. And this is one where, Gavin, were you able to do it just kind of looking at it? Yeah. Okay. So this is one where, like, trial and error you can do, but 42 has a lot of factors. You know what I mean? Like, or a 14, you're like, okay, 14 only splits up as 1 and 4, 14, or 2 and 7, so you kind of play around with those. And then 3 only splits up as 3 and 1, so you kind of play around with those and signs and stuff. So trial and error does work. It's one of those things, though, that I can't give you partial credit, that if you do trial and error and your answer is wrong, hopefully you do this method if it doesn't foil to be right, you know. So let's do this next one. 5 times 12 gets us to what, guys? 60. So we're going to multiply to 60. And when we get to the back, we don't have to do all of them because you guys are getting this, okay? I promise we don't have to overkill it. But we're going to add up to negative 23. All right, so since we multiply to be a positive, we know all our factors are going to be positive. So 1 and 60, 2 and 30, and so forth, right? But it has to be adding to a negative. So remember, what kind of numbers multiply to be positive but add to a negative? They're both negative. So negative 1 and negative 60, but that adds up to negative 61. I don't like it. Negative 2, negative 30, but that adds to negative 32. I don't like it. And then do 60 divided by 3. So negative 3 and negative 20, that adds up to negative 23. For once, we had to go a third step. Watch out. Is that okay? So I'm just taking 60 divided by 1, 2, 3. If that didn't work, 4. If that didn't work, 5. Just keep going, okay? So when we go to rewrite it, 5w squared will stay the same. 12 will stay the same. But negative 23 will be split up as negative 3w and negative 20w. So this is 5w squared minus 3w minus 20w plus 12. That might be one that you guys want to switch the order because you see that 20 and that 5 and you really want to put them together, and that 3 and 12 you really want to put them together. That's fine, but we're going to get the same answer either way. So when you look at 5w squared minus 3w, what can we factor out?
W.
A w. So when we factor out a w, what's that going to give us?
W.
Well, the 5's still there, right?
I always forget.
I know, because you're used to like not having a coefficient there. So 5w, does that look right? Minus 3. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now this next part's kind of odd, okay? So when we look here, notice the signs are the opposite of what we want, right? We want a positive 5w, right now we have a negative 20w. And we want a negative 3, but right now it's a positive 12. So what type of number am I going to factor out? A negative. Remember that negative always just kind of takes care of your signs. And then again, ask yourself, I want a 5 to remain, but right now there's a 20 hanging out. So what do I need to factor out of that 20 so that a 5 remains?
4.
A 4. Or you can look at 20 and 12 and say, hey, a 4 goes into both. So I'm going to factor out a negative 4. So negative 20 divided by negative 4 is a positive 5. I didn't touch the w. He's still there. And then positive 12 divided by negative 4 is a negative 3. And that's what I wanted. Is that okay? So then we're going to underline, we're like, woohoo, that's what I want. The 5w minus 3, let's factor him out in front. 5w minus 3 will leave you with a w minus 4 as the remainder. Don't believe me? Distribute, FOIL, and it should add up to that. Okay?